What if the most profound human connections, those of family and lineage, were twisted into a narrative so unsettling, so deeply tragic, that it challenges the very fabric of societal norms? Imagine a story whispered in hushed tones, buried beneath layers of discomfort and historical suppression, revealing a truth almost too difficult to comprehend. This is not a tale crafted for sensationalism, but a somber exploration into the documented, yet often ignored, realities of extreme isolation and its devastating consequences on human lives. Today, we delve into the harrowing account behind the title. She married her father and her son, the most inbred woman ever recorded in U.S. history, approaching it not with judgment, but with a commitment to understanding the complex historical, social, and psychological forces that could lead to such an unimaginable existence. Our journey into this deeply sensitive subject begins by acknowledging the historical context of extreme isolation in certain pockets of the United States, particularly in remote rural areas during periods when communities were largely self-sufficient and disconnected from broader societal structures. In these secluded environments, often dictated by geographical barriers like mountains or vast wilderness, families could become profoundly insular. The absence of external social interaction, coupled with economic hardship and a lack of educational opportunities, often led to a narrowing of available partners, inadvertently fostering patterns of endogamy in marriage and procreation within a very limited gene pool. It is crucial to understand that such circumstances were rarely, if ever, a conscious choice driven by malice or a deliberate desire for genetic isolation. Instead, they were often the tragic byproduct of necessity, survival, and a profound lack of alternatives. Generations lived and died within the confines of their immediate kin, perpetuating traditions and relationships that, while perhaps ensuring the survival of the family unit in harsh conditions, carried unforeseen and devastating biological and social consequences. The scientific understanding of genetics was, for much of history, non-existent, and the long-term effects of extreme consanguinity, the intermarriage of close relatives, were only dimly perceived through observation of physical and cognitive anomalies that became tragically normalized within these isolated groups. This historical backdrop is not offered as an excuse, but as a vital lens through which to view the individual lives caught within these cycles. The individuals at the heart of such narratives were often victims of their environment, born into circumstances that offered little to no escape. Their stories, when they surfaced, were frequently met with a mixture of horror, disbelief, and a swift societal impulse to bury them, deemed too shocking, too shameful, or too complex to confront. Yet, it is precisely in these suppressed narratives that we find the most poignant lessons about the human condition, the fragility of social structures, and the urgent need for empathy and intervention when confronting the uncomfortable truths of our collective past. It is against this backdrop of historical neglect and profound human tragedy that the story of a woman, whose life became an extreme testament to the devastating consequences of unchecked isolation, unfolds, a reality that challenges us to look deeper into the hidden corners of American history. To truly grasp the horror and complexity of a life defined by such extreme consanguinity, we must delve deeper into the systemic factors and societal failures that, in rare and tragic instances, allowed for the emergence of relationships that defy natural and moral boundaries. This is not about individual pathology, but about the profound breakdown of protective mechanisms within a society. In the most isolated and impoverished corners of the U.S., particularly in the pre-modern era, the absence of external social structures created a dangerous vacuum. Consider the role of extreme poverty. When families are struggling for basic survival, when every hand is needed for labor, and when access to resources is virtually non-existent, the concept of a broader community often shrinks to the immediate household. Education, which provides not only knowledge, but also exposure to diverse perspectives and social norms was a luxury many could not afford. Without it, individuals remained trapped in cycles of ignorance, unaware of the biological dangers of inbreeding or the legal and ethical prohibitions against incest. Their world was their immediate family, and their understanding of relationships was shaped solely by the precedents within that confined sphere. Furthermore, the lack of accessible healthcare played a critical, often devastating role. Genetic conditions, which would be identified and managed in more connected communities, went undiagnosed and untreated. Physical and cognitive impairments, direct consequences of severe inbreeding, became normalized within these isolated groups. These impairments, in turn, could further limit an individual's ability to engage with the outside world, to seek help, or even to comprehend the nature of their circumstances, creating a tragic feedback loop that deepened their isolation and vulnerability. The very individuals most in need of protection were often the least equipped to advocate for themselves. Societal neglect, therefore, stands as a silent accomplice in these tragedies. For decades, and even centuries, vast regions of the U.S. were effectively ignored by governmental and social services. The concept of child protection agencies, social workers, or even widespread public health initiatives was either nascent or entirely absent in these remote areas. When instances of extreme familial relationships did surface, they were often met with a combination of shock, moral outrage, and a swift desire to distance society from such uncomfortable truths. Rather than prompting systemic intervention and support for these vulnerable communities, the response was often one of condemnation and erasure, effectively burying the victims along with the secrets. The power dynamics within these isolated family units were often absolute. In the absence of external authority or alternative social connections, the patriarch or dominant figures could exert almost total control over the lives of family members. For women and children, particularly those with cognitive impairments, the ability to resist or escape exploitative relationships was virtually non-existent. The very notion of consent, in such a coercive and confined environment, becomes a meaningless concept. The woman at the center of this story, therefore, was not merely a participant in these relationships, but a profound victim of a confluence of historical circumstances, societal neglect, and the terrifying breakdown of the most fundamental human protections. Her life, and the lives of those around her, became a chilling testament to the devastating consequences when a society fails to extend its protective embrace to its most vulnerable and isolated members. The profound impact of such extreme circumstances reverberated far beyond the immediate individuals involved, casting a long, dark shadow over the entire community and challenging the very fabric of societal morality. For the woman at the center of this tragic narrative, the
Subscribe to
physical
my
and
channel.
psychological toll would have been immense. The cumulative effects of generations of consanguinity would likely have manifested in a range of genetic conditions, from subtle physical anomalies to severe cognitive impairments, further isolating her and limiting her capacity to navigate a world that offered no understanding or support. Her life, stripped of agency and defined by relationships that were both familial and deeply exploitative, would have been a relentless cycle of trauma and vulnerability. The children born from these unions would inherit not only the genetic predispositions, but also the profound social stigma, often condemned before they even had a chance to live, their very existence a testament to a societal failure. Within the isolated communities where such events occurred, the response was often a complex tapestry of denial, shame, and a fierce protectiveness of their secrets. The concept of family honor, however distorted, often superseded any external moral code. Outsiders who stumbled upon these truths, whether curious journalists, concerned social workers, or even distant relatives, were frequently met with a wall of silence, hostility, or outright denial. The community, in its own way, became complicit in the burial of these truths, not necessarily out of malice, but out of a desperate desire for self-preservation, a deep-seated distrust of external authority, and a profound fear of judgment from a world they barely understood. This collective silence, while providing a fragile shield against external scrutiny, also perpetuated the cycle of abuse and neglect, trapping generations within its confines. Throughout history, there have been various attempts to suppress or understand such uncomfortable truths. Official records, if they existed at all, were often deliberately obscured, misfiled, or destroyed, making it nearly impossible for future generations to trace lineages or fully comprehend the extent of the genetic and social consequences. Stories were relegated to the realm of whispered folklore, becoming cautionary tales stripped of their factual basis, serving to reinforce local prejudices rather than to illuminate systemic issues. The broader societal discomfort with topics like incest, genetic deformities, and child exploitation meant that mainstream media, academic institutions, and even legal systems often shied away from in-depth investigation, preferring to maintain a polite distance from such unpleasant realities. This collective turning away allowed the darkness to persist in the shadows, unexamined and unaddressed. However, despite these formidable efforts at suppression, the truth, in its own way, always finds a path to the surface. Dedicated researchers, social workers, and historians, driven by a profound commitment to justice and understanding, have painstakingly pieced together fragments of these narratives. Their work, often fraught with ethical dilemmas and immense personal challenges, is crucial. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that such tragedies were not isolated anomalies, but often symptoms of deeper systemic issues: extreme poverty, profound lack of education, inadequate healthcare, and the fundamental failure of society to protect its most vulnerable members. Understanding these buried truths is not about assigning blame to individuals, but about learning from the past, acknowledging the profound human cost of neglect, and ensuring that such stories, however painful, are never truly forgotten, so that the lessons they hold can finally be learned and applied to build a more just and compassionate future. In conclusion, the story of the woman at the center of this harrowing narrative, and countless others like her, serves as a stark and painful reminder of the profound impact of extreme isolation, poverty, and systemic neglect. It is a narrative that challenges us to look beyond sensational headlines and delve into the complex web of historical, social, and economic factors that can create environments where such tragedies are not only possible, but tragically almost inevitable. This is not a story to be sensationalized or exploited, but one to be approached with empathy, a commitment to understanding, and a fierce determination to prevent similar suffering in the future. By unearthing these buried truths, we are not dwelling on the past for its own sake, but rather seeking to learn from its most difficult lessons. We are reminded of the critical importance of accessible education, comprehensive healthcare, and robust social safety nets, particularly in marginalized communities. We are compelled to recognize the vulnerabilities of children and the imperative to protect them from all forms of exploitation, regardless of their circumstances. And most importantly, we are called to break the cycles of silence and shame that have historically allowed such injustices to persist. If this exploration has moved you, we encourage you to engage with this topic thoughtfully and respectfully. Share your reflections on the importance of historical understanding and social responsibility in the comments below. Consider supporting organizations dedicated to child protection, poverty alleviation, and historical preservation. And remember, the most powerful way to honor those whose stories were buried is to ensure that their experiences serve as a catalyst for a more just, compassionate, and informed future. Let their silence be broken by our collective commitment to truth and change.